What happens when you purify your body, your mind, your spirit? Something miraculous. The body begins to heal itself. Welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast, where each week we explore new ways to heal your body from the root, igniting your inner healer. You are the medicine. And now, here's your host, Robin Stebbins.
So, Jim Stephenson Jr., welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast. This is the interview I have been looking forward to the most because we have so much to talk about, and I think this is really going to change a lot of how we now view that alternative side of medicine and vitamins and supplements. So welcome to the show once again, Jim. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, kind of giving people a little bit of background, and then we'll just jump right in.
Okay. About 20 years ago, there was a vitamin D test done on somebody that I knew, and that was low, and they took a vitamin D prescription, and it got lower, and I just said, this doesn't make sense. I'd like to understand it, because there were multiple autoimmune type diseases in play right there, including a terrible DEXA scan, bones of an 84-year-old and a 40-some-year-old, stuff like that. So I just wanted to understand it, and I immediately knew right away that they blamed everything on vitamin D, and I didn't know anything about it. So I just did a deep dive for 20 years now and found out it's a pretty fascinating world, and we're focused on what they want us focused on because it's not going to lead us anywhere. That's kind of that in a nutshell. And I guess I should say I run a Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Seiko Steroid Hormone D, which is the true name of vitamin D. And I have a Substack page under my name. And that's pretty much where you can find my stuff. And there's a lot of podcasts out there. You just have to do my name on YouTube, and you'll find them.
Yeah. And then the links are right below us as well in the show notes to find Jim. And I highly recommend, instead of making comments on this podcast and arguments, go first to the Seiko Steroid Hormone D group on Facebook and ask your pathophysiology questions. That's the better way to do it, instead of just attacking because you're afraid or you think that we're creating fear when we're just bringing the truth. So this is more about education. This is, like you said in your hormone group too, it's a classroom, not a debate center.
Right, exactly.
Especially once you learn enough about it, you realize there is really nothing to debate.
That's very true.
Yeah. So you have uncovered several different things since we last spoke, and I want to kind of go over piece by piece so that people understand really how far this goes. It wasn't just, okay, you took a little rat poison and you flushed it out. It's fat soluble, but then you also discovered it might be water soluble. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, it definitely is water soluble. The term early on was water soluble, was replaced with sulfated after a while. And that completely makes sense when you realize Seiko Steroid Hormone D. Seiko just means an open ring, so it's a steroid. Other steroids are stored in the stable sulfated form. DHEA is a perfect example. So once you stop thinking it's a vitamin and you realize it's a steroid, you can make that crossover quite easy. And it's early on they found it. They found there was tons of it in the milk of animals and humans, but they said because it didn't mobilize calcium, it was inert, and they abandoned it. And they did that for a long time. They abandoned a lot of molecules, just like the body was making them needlessly or just for fun, or they were on their way out, for excretion. And that's not the case. Turns out this is how our body has it stored, and there's more sulfated molecules in us than fat soluble molecules.
Interesting. And let's just kind of rewind a little bit back to what a vitamin is. We think that I think, well, a lot of us, when you hear the word vitamin, you think like you take a orange and somehow they put these oranges in a big machine and they concentrate out the active ingredient, which would be the vitamin C. And nothing could be further from the truth when we're talking about vitamins. Vitamins are a made up term. It was invented and created by the pharmaceutical industry in the early 1900s to make money. So they play both sides of the health game. So if you don't want to take their first run of the injections, prescriptions, they've got the netting of the other run, which would be your vitamins and supplements, but they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Like you're saying vitamin D3 is a steroid hormone that you can actually get over the counter, and the 80-year-old that weighs 12 kilograms gets the same dose as the bodybuilder.
Right.
There's no changing the dose for the person. It's all the same. Like we'll take 5,000 international units. When people first started taking vitamin D, this is why one of the two reasons, every one of my patients on my caseload was low in vitamin D. So I had a man that was had the shoulder surgery that was a former surfer and was outside all the time and was very tan and had the same vitamin D level as a bedridden 86-year-old woman. And I thought, how can that possibly be? And then every single one of my patients also 100% was on a vitamin D supplement. How can that be possible unless there's something wrong with the test or unless there's something wrong with the whole industry? And then unfortunately uncovers the whole supplement industry.
Right. And you've written about how the supplements are made, which is a really important thing. Some of them are made in really, really nasty ways when you start reading about them. And so that's pretty important to know.
Well, yeah, it's important to know that like vitamin B12 is made from human feces.
Wow. Yeah.
Like actually.
Okay.
And this is Google. What's interesting though, also I always check to kind of get a read on the milieu of the internet and what I can find and what I can't find. And now like the AI, the chat bots will not answer the questions. What are the synthetic chemicals, or what is synthetic vitamin B12 made of chemically? And before they would start to just give you the rundown of how this chemical produces that chemical reaction. Now, some of them are saying, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. You should do a Google search. And then, of course, Google doesn't take you. So that's not to go down a rabbit hole, but that's how they'll control the information. Right.
And control of information, I'll throw this out there real quick. A lot of people don't realize that there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of blacklisted medical journals with specialization groups inside them that would know the most about any kind of topic you can imagine, and they're blacklisted. Organizations like nurses associations and things like that write journals. All of those are blacklisted. So any search you do, you're not going to find that. You have to target those journals if you want to see what they're putting out.
Yeah, and it's blacklisted for a reason, because it goes against the narrative, and it's a very flimsy house of cards they've built this whole medical system on, so that you have to believe first that there's nutrient deficient soils, then that's the reason that you have to supplement your diet. To everyone that's on the truth community or freedom community, whatever they call themselves, will say, but you have to supplement with something because the soils are depleted. And that's another misinformation, I think, because yeah, there's factory farming, that those foods are nutrient deficient and filled with chemicals, but the local produce that you get from your local farmer that uses biodynamic practices, that's nutrient rich, completely nourished, like, so you're not lacking anything. They keep saying like this is why they test your vitamin D levels, because you're lacking vitamin D, you're lacking a chemical or a steroid hormone. So they just, I mean, when the sun hits my skin, I am getting like 36 different reactions synergistically, but they just pick one.
Right.
And say that's what you need and take a pill. But I believe when we get back to what you're talking about in the beginning, like what gets blamed. So that what's getting blamed for this is you don't have enough sunlight, or your foods don't have enough vitamin D, so you're deficient. When in reality, it's the same playbook they use for everything.
Right.
So you have to have some type of deficiency to have to take this. What I've seen their favorite thing to do is take, if they can find a drug, which is just a bunch of chemicals conglomerated together that changes a lab value. You can say, aha, it's working. Meanwhile, you can't get out of bed, your hair is falling out, and you forget your name on occasion.
All the time I think about that, how you said that in that one podcast, and it sticks with me. They target things like mainstream, the only vitamins, big pharma or whatever, the medical doctor, allopathic medicine. They're only focused on vitamins where there's an intervention. Vitamin D has an intervention. B12 has an intervention. Do they care about E or K or no, there's not a medical intervention. There's a K intervention for the baby as soon as it's born, but not for the adults. It's so important right after birth and then no more.
Right. Yeah. And the thing that I get most, the comment I get most on where I'm explaining sort of what it is, as everyone says, but that's because you need to take it with K2 to mitigate all the calcium in the bloodstream. Can you explain in simple terms why do we have so much calcium in the bloodstream then when we're taking vitamin D3 or also D2?
You have so much calcium in the bloodstream because the hypercalcemia control axis is the 125D with the PTH, parathyroid hormone, and the ionized calcium. So they work together. And there's a ratio there in the blood. You need a certain amount of calcium based upon the other two markers. And so when you up your vitamin D, and nobody's checking that form, 125D, that sets how much calcium you need. But the problem is that if you don't have ample calcium, I've always said this, in your gut at the time, you will have to take it from bone. But lately I've been pointing out it's actually more complex than that. It's 125D in the gut that will make the appropriate receptors that will absorb the calcium. So upping your blood level of 25D doesn't put 125D in your gut. The only way you can put 125D in your gut is if your body chooses to do it. Sure, you could ingest it, but that's not how it works. So stop and think about breast milk or cow's milk. It's full of 125D. It's got the signal in the gut for the baby to absorb the calcium, or the calf or whatever. That's why we shouldn't drink a ton of milk, is because it's really loaded with the active form and you'll absorb too much calcium. Most people aren't low in calcium in the first place, but they're focused on vitamin D because it helps you with calcium. So that signal's not in the gut. So without 125D in the gut, you're left with no choice but to pull the calcium from bone, because you're not going to be able to form a receptor in the gut to absorb the calcium. So you're going to get your calcium elsewhere. And this is where osteoporosis is coming from. You have to look at the big picture. We're said to be deficient from cradle to grave, but yet there's no early on bone issues whatsoever. The only bone issue we're seeing is everybody's getting osteoporosis, and that comes from excess vitamin D. That's the biological act of rodenticide, just non-lethal. So that's what we're seeing. You're labeled immediately as soon as you're born deficient. Everybody's chasing not being deficient, but yet you don't see those bone issues related to true vitamin D deficiency. It's not real. What we're witnessing is excess vitamin D. And by not measuring 125D, that's staying hidden. And one reason it's staying hidden is because this pathway we're on, the actual vitamin D receptors we're focused on, are a detox pathway. So everybody's having major influence of pharmaceutical drugs in that pathway. and they're not activating vitamin D with the typical vitamin D CYP. They're using 3A4, the one that does 60% of all the prescription drugs. Rifampin is a perfect example of something activating 125D through the receptors in this system.
And what does that mean? So we have, is it hijacking those pathways in, so everything that we take is passed through the liver. So when you hijack it with a chemical that your body should not be ingesting, you should not be, we don't have chemical deficiencies, just say that. And again, really quickly, they get you deficient in utero. They tell your mother you're deficient. That's why she has to take prenatal vitamins, which is a whole nother story. But those are even, I think, more toxic, especially with the folate and other things. But back to the issue at hand, when these things are passing through the liver, what does it do to a corticosteroid hormone like vitamin D once you're ingesting that?
They're all going to be competing for the receptors. So in the drug design, they're going to be looking at all the affinities to receptors. And if they target a receptor, they're going to make sure that they have a higher attraction to that receptor than the natural molecules that go there. Otherwise, their drug isn't going to get in there and do what they want it to do. And I'm sure that's what we're seeing right there, what I was just talking about with 3A4 and stuff like that. We're losing those receptors, and then that molecule that gets displaced may go and steal another receptor, and the cascading autoimmune diseases that you see, plus the loss of every one of those systems, along the way. And a lot of those systems, people don't know, are involved in the immune system too. They make the antimicrobial peptides, which are the acids, the stuff there's no immunity to, the stuff leprosy had to block.
Interesting. So that would leave you more susceptible to getting diseased,
right?
Getting sick.
And it's a source of 125D that isn't natural. Your body's not using that as a pathogen defense. It's getting activated because you have a external, a drug is coming into you. And a lot of drugs aren't removed in treatment, water treatment and stuff like that. We don't know what drugs we're getting in our tap water, that's for sure. So that's another big thing, is that's a 125D signal that could be driving osteoporosis as well. And they might not want us to measure the 125D because they know it's spiked from prescription drugs.
Interesting. And no one would be low, so they couldn't sell their vitamin D.
Yeah, there goes all the associations. The minute that they have a data set, a double data set, that paper, boom, it wouldn't even get published, unfortunately. Nobody's going to do it. Who's going to fund it?
Exactly. No one's going to fund it. It's never going to see the light of day, because this whole, what we're looking at with the entire medical system is based on the narrative of a sick-based system. They know cradle to grave what you're worth, sick, disease. Right. They don't want to kill their customers. That's why, people say, well, it's with vitamin D, it would take a huge dose to kill you. They don't want to kill you. And if it's built up in your fat cells, it will slowly deteriorate your health over the long haul, which is, again, what nets them more profit from you. So if you, you buy the vitamin D, that's a little bit of profit, but it's the downstream effects of what that little pill is warranting over and over. So if you get hypercalcemia, usually that leads to heart arrhythmias, or it will calcify your body, will calcify the glomerular capsules, which the tiny pieces break off. That's your kidney stones. That keeps happening over decades. You could go into renal failure, which is their favorite, because they own you 3 days a week for the rest of your life.
Right.
And on and on it goes. So are they essentially hijacking these pathways?
Oh, yeah, they would be, to get their drugs in there. And a lot of the hijacking is being done with the models of the abandoned inert D molecules. So I always say they circled back around, and we're not all gonna fall for the thing that, oh, it's inert, it was made for nothing. People are gonna be like, oh, that's an important molecule, it doesn't influence calcium. They're over here suffering hypercalcemia in the pathway we're on, 125D. They want to make non-calcemic ones. These guys already are looking at what we abandoned, and figuring out those are the ones. I didn't fully answer the vitamin K thing, though. I wanted to go back to that real quick. So beyond that signal in the gut that I talked about a minute ago, the vitamin K has to be absorbed in the same way that vitamin D is. It's a fat soluble. You're going to be taking a fat soluble form, and it's going to be picked up by LDL cholesterol. So you're going to influence your lipid panel with any fat soluble you're taking. And it's not going to help you acquire the vitamin D. It's not going to help you acquire the calcium. The vitamin D is going to still go and do its whole own job. And if it summons calcium, it's going to summon calcium, and vitamin K is not going to tell it where to summon the calcium from. It has its own decision. And if it's not a signal in the gut, it's going to come from bone. So that's how it's going to work. Then it's going to be needed there to protect you from that calcium you just upped because you were taking vitamin D. So I'm not saying vitamin K is a bad thing. It doesn't protect people in the ways people think. It doesn't protect you from osteoporosis, and you're still turning your blood into shellac following this whole vitamin D regimen.
And the vitamin K is another chemical. So the reason people want you to take it is it might protect a little bit against your first poison, but you can't add another poison to your first poison to negate the poisons. Mm-hmm. It's this chemical reaction. And like you were saying earlier, with all of these drugs in our tap water that you can absorb also through your hands and bathing and showers, I'm sorry, your tiny little filter on your shower is not going to get that stuff out. They're microscopic sized, and so who knows what you've got in your system now that you're adding in this steroid hormone. Then you're going to add in another set of chemicals with the K2, including all the other chemicals in your food.
Right.
And that's where we get into what I call the synergy. Like if you don't mess with the synergy of God's medicine, which is the whole lemon, which has the enzymes on the outside of the lemon that help you digest it, the lemon peel, the pith helps remove metals, the juice gives you the nutrients that you need, working synergistically. So that's trillions of different reactions happening simultaneously. Right. We'll never be able to figure that out. But again, science picks one,
right?
Because they can make a chemical copy, and usually they can change a lab value.
Right. And with vitamin D, I get how they got focused on calcium right away. Everybody had rickets, but you have to ask the question behind the question. Why did everybody have rickets? No child labor laws and no compulsory education. The kids, everybody was poor. It was a very rough time in the country, and kids were working in factories and they weren't getting sunlight. And so that's how it all began. So I understand they placed all their interest on calcium because they discovered it right then, and they were trying to figure it all out. But on down the road, you got to realize the body isn't just making all these various different molecules for fun. They have a purpose, and it might not be calcium, but even to this day, in a lot of ways, they're still really holding on to that calcium piece.
They're holding on to that calcium piece because they want the narrative to read that if you're vitamin D deficient, somehow that means you're not going to develop properly if you're in child years, or if you're an adult, then you're going to get osteoporosis or bone density loss. That's the main thing that they tell you to take vitamin D and calcium for, and that's what people in these nursing homes are taking. Yet they have the highest incidences of osteoporosis and bone density loss of anyone that's taking the calcium, or even, like you said, drinking milk. And does that include raw milk?
Raw milk would, it would definitely have a lot of active vitamin D in it as well, because it's the signal to acquire calcium for the baby that's forming, the calf, whatever's forming. And I didn't even really think about that until about a year ago, maybe. And I said, there's going to be a ton of it, because I learned, there's a signal in the gut. That's where it needs to be. A very special substance helps you absorb it. It's 125D.
Right.
And so then I immediately looked at the data on the milk, and it was full of 125D. I haven't looked at a paper of how full, well, there's a 40% spike in the blood level of pregnant women. So I would imagine some of that translates. I probably put out stuff that talks about the level in the breast milk in the past and just don't remember, but without a big focus on it, we know it's going to be ample, whatever's there. It's not going to be deficient.
Well, and again, you look at, I think nature gives us the blueprint. So you look into wild animals, not domesticated, and they nurse from the mother for a designated period of time, which I would believe would be the time when their bones are growing or they're needing the most active form of the 125D.
Yeah, I've looked at information about the milks, the various milks of mammals, and it talks about time to double weight, and it's 180 days, I believe, in us. I think it's 47 days in cattle. Everything has something different. The most potent milk is rabbit milk. That's protein and calcium content. There's 15 times, I think, more calcium in the cow's milk than there is in the breast milk of women. Ionized calcium, form of ionized calcium. I was just looking at that this morning. There's a lot more crude protein in the other milks. Too much protein's hard on the kidneys. We wouldn't put a ton through a baby. So things like that. It's interesting to look at that stuff.
And so, and your paper that you did, your most recent one on Substack, goes into a lot of the breast milk connection.
Mm-hmm. Breast milk and our blood too. The blood of the babe, infants, and our blood too. And what it is actually something you said a little while ago. This would be the blueprint of vitamin D in this pathway, because there's other pathways, but in this pathway, this would be, and some of this does translate to the other pathways. There's sulfated forms in the other pathways. When I say pathway, that might confuse people. I'm talking about 7-dehydrocholesterol going to D3. And once that commitment goes from D3 to 25D, you're in this pathway. And that progresses to 125D. Once you go to 25D, you can't back up to D3 and go into the other pathways. There are some crossovers here and there, but by and large, you're in the pathway headed to 125D.
Which is the active form.
Right, in that pathway.
In that particular pathway.
In that particular pathway.
And you need enough cholesterol to shuttle that active form to where it needs to go?
Right, and to make it in the first place.
Okay. So let's suppose, and this isn't very hard to guess, most people are doing this, taking a statin drug and let's say 5,000 IU of vitamin D3.
Yeah.
What's that going to do over time inside their body?
Well, first off, that's a lot of vitamin D. That should move a person, according to Medscape, 50 points. So on top of whatever you are. So if you're at 40, that should move you to 90, and we know that'll increase your all-cause mortality right there. Looking at that, if you want to use that as a guide.
Yeah.
But the statins, this is David Grimes' work. They're just forms of vitamin D molecules. And there's several different statins. They all have different affinities to the different receptors, the vitamin D receptors, the thyroid receptors, and it's all in his paper. And I can share that with you. So that's what they are. But then in this latest work that I found where these statins are actually onboarded, so to speak, into the body. And they're actually using the system that one of the water soluble forms of vitamin D at the 25D level would normally be a substrate to fuel, so to speak. And that's the OAT pathway, which is organic, I think anion something transport. And so there's nothing organic about statins. They shouldn't be hijacking the system. And that system also delivers molecules to tumors, things like that. So you might be disrupting your true cancer fighting molecules and stuff like that by getting on a statin. Taking vitamin D will almost ultimately land you on a statin, because you're not going to be making, it's because you're going to try to curtail your cholesterol. So, you're going to be using more cholesterol to shuttle the vitamin D, like we just talked about. LDL specifically, the one that'll get you flagged. But beyond that, taking vitamin D causes you to not make vitamin D out of substrate, cholesterol substrate, 7-dehydrocholesterol. There's more left there to become cholesterol. Plus, you make yourself have to have more LDL. And maybe you're trying to be healthy and you're taking vitamin K, going to get shuttled by LDL cholesterol too. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, your LDL, get on a statin. That's, so they might know that. Maybe that's why they up the blood level in a way, to know it hurt everybody to a statin.
I think that's, I really start to look at their game plan and their playbook, it's pretty similar. I mean, they're very clever. I mean, it's clever because they're working backwards from what they already know. So they know how to step forward. We're kind of catching up to see like, okay, now this is doing this molecule. So if I'm hearing that right, taking the vitamin D3 initially will raise your LDL, which they say the LDL is the bad cholesterol. Your body doesn't make anything positive or negative. But they'll tell you like, oh no, your LDL is high. That could lead to stroke, heart attack, a horrible death. When in reality, chronically lower cholesterol, I see, creates less myelination of the nervous system inside the body. So that a demyelination can be called a number of things. I would call it Parkinson's, MS, the motor disorders like myasthenia gravis, and then also chronic demyelination in the brain then would lead to things like dementia, Alzheimer's.
Right.
And the diagnoses are simply just the demyelination. They just put a label on it so that they can get the insurance to pay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true.
Okay, and so and in reality, the higher your cholesterol, like over 200, you want, is a good thing.
Right. Well, you just look, the LDL cholesterol is shuttled for fat soluble molecules. So you're going to shuttle a lot of healing molecules with it and stuff like that. Every cell membrane needs some of it. Like you said, in the brain, it's important. Cholesterol isn't a bad thing. We act like it's a bad thing. And then people think that eating cholesterol is the key to having a certain level of cholesterol in your body. And it doesn't work like that. And there's that saying, and I've said it before, if eating cholesterol raised your cholesterol like that, bald men would eat hair, so that they could have hair again. It doesn't, they don't translate like that. It doesn't work like that.
Right. And so that's why, again, when we're talking about the remedy or the solutions, the solution isn't to follow what the medical industrial complex is telling you the solution is, because again, they profit from your illness and your ignorance, but they profit the sicker you are, but not to kill you. So they got to take you to that edge. They still want you to be able to work 50 hours a week, but shut down the prefrontal cortex of your higher reasoning. So you're really not going to think too much about what's going on. You're just going to trust what the doctor's saying, take your statin drug with initially the vitamin D, which will then, sounds like it will raise your LDL. Right.
It will. It'll throw off all those ratios too. That'll get you flagged as well.
Like triglycerides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the ratio of each one to each other,
And again, very important to point out, these ratios that they're telling you are your health markers, like you should have low LDL and high HDL, are just because they have these drugs that change those markers. So they can say, oh, your LDL came down, your HDL went up, it's working.
Yeah.
Men then, have their problems because I think it also statins lower testosterone. So men have that issue, and I guess women too. And it also deteriorates your tendons and ligaments, specifically the Achilles tendon, where your people have blown out Achilles tendons.
That's terrible.
And the reason I'm so obsessed with it, not just because I gave this to my son and he broke his shoulder, but I see the effects of the pharmaceutical industry on really good people over
Right.
decades, and at the end of their life now working hospice. And it's horrible. It's not a way to spend your golden years going to 6 or 7 different doctors every week
Mhm.
and taking 25 to 30 different prescription drugs.
Right. Right. And in some ways it's all started with an excess. There's no telling how much the excess vitamin D pours us into all these disease states that then get treated. There is just absolutely no telling, because nobody's going to look at that. You know, the body already has a perfect system and they are completely ignoring it because it didn't influence calcium.
And have you seen any link to feeding tumors with any of these hijacked pathways or molecules?
With the water soluble stuff, the sulfated,
Yeah.
no, they just function as the reservoir, as the pool substrate there. And the way it works is, I say it's a perfect system because if you sat down to design it, it's how you'd make it, because there's sulfated molecules at the 70 hydrocholesterol level, at the D3 level, at the 25 D3 level, and at the 125 D3 level. So the body will first make the normal fat soluble molecule. Then it will use a salt, a certain enzyme, and it will change it into the sulfated form. That enzyme that changes into the sulfated form is unique and for that. And then it will be changed back into its counterpart, not changed up a level. The sulfate won't go from 70 hydrocholesterol sulfate to the D3 level. It will be changed back into the 70 hydrocholesterol first. Then an enzyme will activate it to the D3 level. And the enzymes don't cross over. The enzyme that's going to activate 70 hydrocholesterol to D3 can't impact the sulfated form. It's a separate enzyme that works on the sulfated form. And so at each level, there's 70 hydrocholesterol sulfate waiting when you need more 70 hydrocholesterol fat soluble. Same thing, repeated at D3, repeated at 25D, repeated at 125D, repeated in the other pathways. Then the spin-off of the epimerization forms of the vitamin D molecule that the children start making when they're supplemented can be 60% of their 25D. There's a sulfated form of that as well. So you've got all these storage forms, and some people are immediately going to say, wait, this is water soluble, means it's going to go out in urine immediately. No, it has the identical binding affinity to vitamin D binding protein that the fat soluble does. So they don't compete for their carriers, and they have the same half-life because it's the vitamin D binding protein that gives them their half-life. So they have the same half-life, so it's waiting there. There's always more abundance of the sulfated forms than the fat soluble forms in pregnant women's blood, in normal people's blood. There's more in babies' blood. Their ratio is a little higher to the sulfated. It's more like 3-1 in their blood, whereas it's just maybe 60-40 in ours. So that's the difference. So it's at every level, but it's the breast milk that'll absolutely blow your mind on this, because the breast milk is looking at 1966. We knew this. The breast milk was 98% water soluble and only 2% fat soluble. And that's all we're counting. I mean, the numbers are astounding. There's 950 IU of water soluble in a liter of breast milk, and there's only 16 IU of fat soluble, and that's all that's counted. That's why we say breast milk is not breast milk is not a source of vitamin D. They're counting 2% of it. Wow. Cow's milk isn't that different. It's 85-15, but there's way less vitamin D in the cow's milk than there is in human breast milk. There's 4 times more vitamin D in women's breast milk than cow's breast milk or cow's milk.
And do we know what that's used for? So the infants are building into a human. So clearly there's all of those necessary processes in that time that you wouldn't need later on in life. That sounds like super growth. Super growth to me kind of spells a little bit like cancer. So if you're taking these, wouldn't you maybe start a super growth somewhere in the body? Because
You could, yeah. Who knows what it influenced? We do know that early on they saw an influence of celiacs and asthma and all, just all kinds of the allergic pandemic kind of began. And we have good data sets because they started, and multivitamins are included in that, not just vitamin D. And so they have good data sets because we started it in different countries at different times and saw the same effect in each country, the allergic pandemic. And so there's pretty good science on that, but we're not going to look at that imprinting because we still have fortification in place. We've had fortification in place coming on 100 years here pretty soon.
right.
So, it's a really big deal. The other thing I would point out about the difference in the cow and how there's 4 times more vitamin D in the human milk is that the baby's not going to be in the same environment as the calf as soon as it's born. And the calf's probably going to be exposed to some sunlight, and probably most of their hair probably makes vitamin D for them too. So it's probably, they have a lot better system immediately out of the chute, where a baby's going to need more of that pool substrate. In fact, I think they referred to it in one of them as being, a trap in the fetus. I read in one of the papers, they referred to the sulfated forms at the 3-to-1 ratio and whatnot as being a trap in the fetus.
That's so interesting. So I can see how they can then get the narrative that, the babies or the vitamin D is necessary, because you can see infants need it for growth, development, which includes the bones. So if you're deficient or you have bone density loss, these little grandmas, in the nursing homes aren't getting outside at all.
Right.
So then, of course, you would take these things that would build the bones: calcium, vitamin D, multivitamins, to create what they were seeing in infancy. But that's the exact opposite, because the breast milk has the building blocks. What you're saying now, it's the water soluble versus the fat soluble that we were more focused on, but it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes through hydrolysis. It goes right back to that form using those enzymes. Yeah, so it's just waiting there as you need it. Another like pressure valve. And the other thing that's going to destroy them wanting to talk about this is that supplementing does not increase it. So they're not going to be able to tell you, so what, there's just another great place to put some more in your body. No, this one doesn't work like that, because it already is your storage and it's already being regulated. There's already a homeostasis going on here. So you don't want to mess with it. And again, another molecule with no seasonal variation like the active form.
Okay, so then we look at solutions. And a lot of people ask, well, then if I can't take the pill, you can't get sunlight in a pill that has chemicals in it that kills small animals. So then what are the solutions? I have seen remarkable improvements when you stop the root cause. You stop taking poisons that are hijacking. Like these poisons, these chemicals that you're taking then are taken in such an amount that they hijack your natural pathways. Mm-hmm. So what you're consuming in your food, then the nutrients would not necessarily be as assimilated into the body if all of your other pathways are being hijacked by these different chemicals.
Right. And then, like you were talking about the people in the nursing home not getting sunlight and all that, we're probably beyond that, because depending upon who we're talking about, what lifestyle they lived, they may have already exhausted their machinery. And that's a reality. Exhausted their machinery to keep building bone. I have a paper that talks about how we've been focused on constant high bone mineral density. And really, we probably should only have high bone mineral density when we're healing something, not constantly. The telomeres can only divide so many times, and to keep that in context, just remember, cancer has telomerase. It inhibits the telomeres, so it can divide forever and grow as much as it wants. Your body, your functions in your body, like making osteoclasts and osteoblasts to build and take down bone, which is a signal you're messing with by messing with D and calcium. Those are osteocytes. They're part of your immune system. You're tying up in that process, and you may reach a point where you can't make any more of them. And here comes Boniva to the rescue. So you don't tear down your bone. It sits there and gets old. Then you have a life-threatening break.
Yeah. And that's what I see. Everyone that's doing the little nasal mists with the different types of bone builders, usually they do it once a week, have the most broken bones and the most bone pain.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I didn't even know there were nasal mists, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, there's no telling what's going on behind the scenes, and you get to see behind the scenes. I wouldn't know any of that's going on. Look at all the money. Look at those are all probably medical interventions. Those are, wow. And everybody in society is carrying that burden, not just the health burden, the financial burden.
When you start to see different insurances, so Medicaid or welfare, I get to see how those patients are treated, treat and street. And then those with the good insurance, they get the special procedures and the special drugs that cost, thousands of dollars, which just more ways to poison you. My Medicaid patients tend to do better than those with better insurance, interestingly enough. So is there, most people are not low in vitamin D because they're testing the wrong molecule.
Right.
So to have healthy bones, besides stopping the root causes of the 30 different prescription drugs and the vitamins and supplements, the poisoning, what other ways can people stay in a harmonious state with their body and have healthy bones and healthy systems in the body? Well,
with the bone stuff, you're going to have to get reasonable sun for health, where you're not covering your eyes with a UV shield. And I don't say sun gaze in the sense of looking at it. You're probably going to need to figure out things that I don't know yet, like the morning sunshine, bringing in the red light and doing all that. But dietary sources of things like boron. Boron's really important, and you can get it in your diet. And I would say any of the things that you've already decided are important to this cofactor world and stuff, just go and source them into Whole Foods, because that's how they're really, really going to work. And there's studies that show that, and they're very specific about what they talk about. They talk about K, I think magnesium and D, but those are three right there that are really important that you want to get from natural sources. And stop and think about how you get 90% of your vitamin D from sun and then 10% from diet. But yet they're telling you that your 90% is so broken that not only are you not even getting near 90%, that you're having to now put 300, 400% of what you think is realistic through what was supposed to be the 10% pathway. That right there should tell you that's gold manipulation. That and cradle to grave, and all we have is osteoporosis, no rickets. Right. And look at a bell curve of the population of the US. It's right there at 20 to 24, where we know is a sweet spot with the lowest all-cause mortality and stuff like that. So there's an excess of vitamin D, not a deficiency in it. And it is driving tons of disease, and it's just pseudoscience. It's so shallow to tell you 125D in this pathway does all the work in a study, and then go and compare it to a goal that was set by some scientists and not raise the goal for the active. That gives it away too. If everybody was low in vitamin D, so low that you had to raise the goal, you would have to raise both goalposts. If we were coming, that tells you right there, nobody's low in the active form.
Yeah. And because it's not a bell curve.
Right.
It's all.
It wouldn't. You're right. It's the molecule of immune response, and it would show the influence of the other drugs that we're talking about and stuff like that. And there could be so much stuff being created in a pathogen environment that there's ectopic vitamin D coming out into the blood. And you have these people that'll tell you that 125D, it changes too much in the course of a day, so don't measure it. It only has an 8-hour half-life and stuff like that. So it could be 3 different measures. That's not, look at a diurnal rhythm, a calcium influencing hormone, and you see they have a rhythm that's expected. If they measure them all at the same time every day, we would have some standardizations of that. But it's the molecular immune response with other influences and stuff like that. So it's They don't want to measure it, period. It's going to hurt a lot of different things.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course not, because then you wouldn't be able to sell your brand of snake oil. And then another comment that I get constantly is people in the far northern climates believe that they have to supplement, that somehow the body is deficient in compensating for winter months in far northern climates and Alaska.
There's something to be said about the light in the northern climates, but you're not going to be able to move in on vitamin D and blame it. Let's take SAD, for example. That's not even necessarily northern climate driven. Right. But SAD, if you look at what a SAD light is, a SAD light doesn't have UVB in it. It doesn't make any vitamin D. It's full spectrum, 10,000 lux. It's a nice bright light. It might be bright enough to hit the retina and make some active vitamin D in the brain, possibly, but nobody's going to probably study that. But SAD is other light stuff, and other things. Who knows? It could be gloomy weather just in general. I don't like this weather. I don't like the cold. There's a lot more to it than that, but that isn't the answer to that. And there's no change in the 125D in those people, even if they are in northern climates and having other things. Now, there may be some issues with some of the other molecules, but until we start looking at them, we won't know. We really won't know. We're not looking at the main pathway of vitamin D. I can't stress that enough. Right. We found it second. We called it the alternative pathway. You either make pregnenolone or you make vitamin D molecules. They're not for the vitamin D receptors, another thing that throws you off. And then as far as the whole calcium world and the breast milk world and stuff, you've got to add endocannabinoids back to the conversation, because they're involved in the breast milk. They're involved in the forming of bone. It's going to be endocannabinoid at play to absorb calcium in the gut. So these are all things that I'm just going to say it. Endocannabinoids were found in invertebrate species first. And in order to make the PSYOP work, when they finally found a plant that contained endocannabinoid molecules, they named it cannabis. And you're just supposed to think that's its origin and not a human or invertebrate origin, and that it's not part of us for millions of years. And it is. And until you bring endocannabinoid systems back into your life and your world, you probably won't be fully healthy. Some people probably are firing on all cylinders in that world. Some people aren't.
Right. And smoking cannabis is not going to create the endocannabinoid pathways. That's what a lot of people say. Oh, well, we have the receptors because we're supposed to be smoking cannabis. That's a great way for the slave population to lower their frequency, so they will fall for these vitamin D scams. Like, here's a convenient to swallow rat poison to take care of the sunshine in the winter months. And I know a lot of practitioners say, but I've seen miracles when I give people rat poison. They go from suicidal to feeling better. Well, I think when you take poison, you release adrenaline because your body has to deal with it. And that adrenaline can become addictive. There's research, and there's research suggesting that infants can become addicted when born to the prenatal vitamins.
Oh, it sets some of those early papers on hormone imprinting talk about how it sets the stage, and it sets the sensitivity, which they're going to be insensitive, because they were hit with so much. And so life isn't going to be normal from then on in that steroidal type world. And those molecules, they all do multiple different things. And just like I say in a lot of podcasts, run on different oils, run on different fuels. Our body there are different bone builders in this pathway even. So we think 25D, 125D, it's the bone builder. No, 2425D is a bone builder too, and has influence on PTH. So I do that because I'm thinking of the diagram in my mind. But so there's a lot more to it than people realize. And there's way more molecules. Most people, they know, if you'd ask them, they might know 3 molecules. Most people that are focused on the mainstream deficiency, some people know vitamin D and they don't realize D3 isn't the 25D they're measuring. And don't even know about active form. I didn't know about active form when I began. I just saw that 2,5-D level was low and went down with the prescription. And then it was an aha moment for me when I realized that wasn't the active form. Just that name alone should make you realize, hey, I need to look at it's the active form. It's the one that goes to the receptor. It does the genomic response. It's what we're after.
Right. And most people would not be low in that.
No, it's not compatible with life. You look at the people that don't have that, they take it.
Right.
Hypoparathyroidism, secondary hyperparathyroidism, and chronic kidney disease. And if you look at the sulfating enzymes in the body, it's liver. Predominantly the liver is handling all of this creation of these molecules. So they're probably stored in there in mass. We still don't have any testing. And I said this in a podcast the other day. It's so sad that somebody's been able to figure out there's 2 years worth of water soluble B12 stored in the liver, but we don't know how much vitamin D is in there. It's what you don't see that's more telling than what you do see. And that other saying, it's the lens through which you view life that really matters.
That's it. And that's why they want to hijack our perspective amongst all of our, pathways in the liver. They have to hijack our perspective from early on, tell us these great big lies. So we split our personality. There's the one that has to function in society and pretend to believe the lies. And then there's the real you. And so we're all these people walking around with these facades. A couple of things I wanted to say too, I started thinking about, and then in utero with these prenatal vitamins, you might come out addicted, but that would also be you're being bombarded with these really toxic chemicals that could create allergies. We're seeing allergies to peanuts that are killing children. Mm-hmm. Never saw that when I was growing up. Or, all of these other symptoms that they have to label, ADHD and anxiety disorders and all these other things could be the disharmonious state from these chemicals.
Right. There's too much of a concentration, no cofactors. There's more than one. That's a really good point. You made me think of MMR. Are you going to be okay handling who's going to get 3 infectious diseases at once? No one ever, but it will do that for you. And it's a good thing, and you'll build immunity from it. Yeah. Believe us.
Yeah, believe us. We're not profiting. It's like I always say, you don't go to the car salesman to tell you the pros and cons of the car. They're going to sell you a car. When you go into the medical industrial complex, they're going to sell you their brand of snake oil because it nets them profit from the purchase of the pill, but then their downstream revenue is probably 10 to 15 fold.
Right. It's like that saying, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Yeah. You've got your focus, and nobody's going to bring you off that. No amount of reality, like knowing that there's dozens and dozens of vitamin D molecules should be enough for people to say, well, what do all these other ones do? What are our levels? How come we don't know any of this? Yeah. How come we know so much about this and it's 100% association? And getting blamed for all human disease it can't even be involved with in the first place. Like it's related to sweating from the forehead. Okay, let's see a biological paper where that pans out. It doesn't. It's all association, It's really sad.
It is sad because they rely on our ignorance. And you can see, a lot of people like to talk about the Flexner report and Rockefeller taking over the allopathic medicine in the 20s. Well, you think he didn't take over the alternative medicine also? He's playing both sides of it. He doesn't. They don't care what brand of poison you're taking. Take the pharmaceutical that's in a drug bottle, which I have less of a problem with because they tell you right there on the printout what it causes, as opposed to the wolf in sheep's clothing. It's these are the good guys. These are on your side. No, they're not. They're just the same as the allopathic, as the functional and alternative medicine.
Yeah.
And you can't, let's suppose for a moment, we believe their delusion that you are deficient, like you're born deficient and you can't eat foods to maintain a nutrient positive. So you have to take these supplements. Well, you can't take, like, I can't go out and eat drywall or crushed oyster shells and expect to have the nutrients from it. The plants are there for us to eat that have the bioavailable nutrients of the boron. I don't think people should eat their borax laundry soap to get the boron. Eat the plants that are high in boron. Eat the plants that are high in the, again, K2. It's a misnomer that it's just the K2 that we're after. We're after the synergy of the plant, because it has all of the things that then make it bioavailable to you that we cannot, as humans, recreate.
Right. And a lot of people, I don't know what the number would be like, but a lot of people are going to get their boron transdermally in hot springs and spas, and that's a big thing, actually. Back where I grew up in New Mexico, there's a lot of hot springs, and there's papers done on them that talk about how healthy they are for you, and so that's largest organ, the skin.
Yes,
it's a great way to do it. So,
and that's, again, when you're in a synergistic relationship, that feels amazing. You're just naturally drawn to the hot springs, like the goats are naturally drawn to the minerals on the rocks. That's what you do. You're naturally drawn to what is healthy and healing for your body, instead of hijacking your natural intuition and letting somebody in a white coat tell you to, drink your own urine or put turpentine and castor oil and drink that down. Yeah.
That's just going to be because you're already broken, already hacked, already something else.
Yep. You're born a mess. You're born diseased, and you have to take the medical industrial complex's brand of snake oil, aka poisons, chemicals, to be healthy. And how crazy is that? You cannot poison the body.
A molecule we make too, and you don't see. They'll tell you some issues with pets, and there are some issues with certain pets. They're domestic animals, so you have to consider their lineage and stuff like that. But when you look at the world of nature, there's not a vitamin D problem in nature, and they're going to blame that on we don't get as much light. But if you look at the dynamics of making vitamin D, it takes very little exposure really to make the ample amount of vitamin D that you need. It's other things that we're missing out on, that we're not measuring, not talking about, not looking at. It's not this vitamin. If we're so focused on this and all the energy is going to it, it's the wrong place. Mm-hmm. When you find yourself in the moral majority, it's time to pause and reflect. Just because you add magnesium and vitamin K to it, you can't bring the most harmful thing from allopathic mainstream medicine over. They're the ones giving you the vaccines. That it's allopathic medicine regardless. It doesn't matter if you dress it up a little bit.
That's
and they mean well. They mean well. I'm not trying to throw in, when I use woke in that sense, we do need to be woke, but woke in the good sense. Woke used to be a good word.
Right.
It's used improperly anymore.
Yeah. But, again, they hijack everything. They hijack the truth and taint it in their way so that now you can't have that discussion. And yes, I believe, and as I did when I went into nursing school, almost everyone had positive intentions for making people better. But and I asked all the questions in nursing school because none of the information made sense about why people needed to take these vaccines or get boosters, or if you step on a rusty nail, get the tetanus shot. Well, didn't you already just get the supposed tetanus in the rusty nail? Why are you giving yourself more tetanus after you step on the tetanus?
Right. Yeah.
And you're supposed to be immune anyway because you got the Tdap when you were born.
Yeah, it's a vaccine. It's not going to save you now. It takes weeks to work.
But they all do it. And
everyone's... It's how they move that vaccine.
Yeah.
And I fell for that. It was EMTs that pointed that out to me.
Right.
A couple of EMTs I worked with, and they said, it's just a chance to, get a vaccine moved. It's not going to help you for what just happened.
Right. Exactly. But you've got the fear in you of, oh my gosh, lockjaw. Mm-hmm. I don't want my kid to get lockjaw, or I don't want to get lockjaw, or whatever else. They put the fear in you when you're young with those books like Old Yeller and whatever else,
Oh yeah.
so that you're terrified of getting these crazy diseases and dying and foaming at the mouth. So it's like, well, I'll just go to the doctor because they look nice and trustworthy and have kind eyes, and get the injection, which could help with the placebo, nocebo effect too. Like, okay,
Right.
well, you believe it's going to work. It does.
That's funny that Ole Yeller and all that. A lot of people don't know this. Maybe you know this. All over the place, there's programs where they drop frozen fish from the sky that are rabies vaccinations for the wild animals. And you can look up the program in your state and see how long they've been doing it and stuff like that. I can imagine being out there walking and all of a sudden frozen fish are dropped near me or something for coyotes. It'd be pretty wild, but it's just interesting. I just point that out because you made me think of it.
Yeah, I did know about that, and I do know they drop pellets as well, because they have to get their vaccines in anything and everything for whatever other reasons we don't know.
Right.
That's another
Right.
show, but yeah, I told you I'd keep you at an hour. I've already gone over. So, is there anything that we missed that you really think we should point out?
One other reason that vitamin D would be low outside of that bell curve thing for the people that are struggling at 10 and stuff like that, that is that negative acute phase reactant that is expected with that molecule. That's its class of molecule. And compare that to a positive acute phase reactant like C-reactive protein. That's going to go up when you have an inflammatory insult. Vitamin D, 2,5-D is going to go down. There's papers on the big C about that now. Mm-hmm. And so that should be expected. It's carried by vitamin D binding protein and albumin. Both those are negative acute phase reactants. They're going to drop. So you would expect that to be lower as a marker for illness, not the cause. So that's not what's at play there. And it's not connected to the 125D. Even when it's low like that, that doesn't mean you're 125. Some of the biggest gaps I've seen are like a 10 and an 80, stuff like that. So that's not going to be the issue. And on the water soluble thing, I'll throw this out here. When I was doing the research to put this out, I did get asked a question about two 5D tests that a person had. And I was really busy and I didn't have the time to look at it right then. And what ended up happening was, in looking at all the testing that's in these studies that are in this report or whatever you want to call it that I put together, I learned what kind of tests. And I went back and I looked at this woman's tests, and what she had a typical 2,5-D test, fat soluble, and she had the water soluble test. She came in at 11 on the fat soluble. In the United States, that would have put her on a prescription immediately. Luckily, her practitioner, even though didn't know what they were doing, she used the test and fortunately knew that was a good number, was at 90 in the water soluble. So 101 overall. So, and I would think that this is nanomole. So 11 is actually pretty low. So I think there'll be a situation low coupled with high, just like we see with 2,5-D and 125-D. I think you might see that there's a lot of sulfated still, but it's sequestering, or the negative acute phase reactant is at play with that 11 level, but there's still ample substrate of sulfated, still ample active D. It's a complete false deficiency. And then two other things, I might as well throw them in there. If you specifically look at any form of cancer, you'll see that most of them have a mechanism to block vitamin D, even though mainstream will tell you low levels in those cause them to get that. So they'll want you to have higher, but it's never going to work on the cancers. They specifically block it. And I think that might be it. That might be all I needed to tell you. Can't think of anything else.
Yeah. And that goes along with everything else we're talking about. Again, the synergy. We don't know all of the downstream effects of hijacking these things and creating out of balance levels with the chemicals.
Right.
It changes the levels, which then the downstream effects inside the body, who knows? I think a lot of this, when we're consuming chemicals, and tumors are made up of lots of toxic chemicals, last thing you want to do is puncture them with a biopsy. But again, I think when we look at just down and dirty solutions, number one, stop the root causes. Don't consume any more chemicals in your eyes or ears too, movies and music. But stop the root causes, and then the plants. I like wild hunted meats as the premier of, the most nutritious. Lots of sunlight if you can. Spring water, rest when you need to rest. And that encapsulates, I think, a perfect healing program. Of course, you have to have positive relationships and the rest of it. But
right.
Again, that's not $1 trillion industry that is going to confuse us to the point where we then are looking at pieces of paper that say, okay, just take the rat poison, look at the benefits on our peer-reviewed articles. That's how they get us.
Right. And all of the vitamin D is rear view. It's like,
right.
Here's the levels in these people that got the diseases, but when we get your level to that, or get people's level to that have those diseases, the disease doesn't go away, so it's a woulda, shoulda, coulda vitamin. I say that all the time. It just makes you feel like a failure, including the breast milk, everything. Just like the human body's an abject failure in all of this, but especially in the vitamin D world, with something we make.
Right.
Something we make.
If you don't have enough of it. So again, in the northern climates, we're not talking about the lack of vitamin D causing the problem, or the SADS, or the feeling of suicidality. It's lots of other things going in. And I lived in Bellingham, Washington for 20 years, and I felt it. It was depressing. It's depressing when you don't see the sun. I think that's it. We get energy and life force from the sun. So people that stay inside get depressed. Animals that stay inside get depressed. People put them on, the drugs like Prozac and benzodiazepines, because we're not meant to be indoors.
Yeah, it creates a lot of stuff. It releases endorphins. There's a lot of good from it. And I live in Washington State. I'm just over the mountain from where you used to live.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying.
Well, thank you so much, Jim Stephenson Jr. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate all of the time and devotion into the research so that we can awaken to the miraculous capacity of our human bodies to work synergistically, to heal themselves, that we don't need these toxic ingredients to stay healthy.
Right, exactly. And I totally agree.
And all of the links, I highly, highly, highly recommend. I send people over to your Facebook group all the time, the Steroid Hormone D Facebook group. It's a classroom. We're not in there for debating, but it has the research. People want the research. It's got the research. And it's a lot of really intelligent people in there that can answer all of your burning questions and then help you explain this to other people.
Right. And if people just really feel they have something just amazing that would blow me away and change my opinion on something, send it to me on Messenger. I constantly check my other messages. I want to see something. I'm not tripling down on being right about anything. I do this because I want to help people. I've devoted almost all of my free time to this research. And I said in a post the other day, I've made $6,500 off this in 19 years. And I paid at least 30% of that to taxes. So this isn't about me making money. I just am driven to try to help people with this because I see what a major scam it is.
Yep. And that's my last post on TikTok says exactly that. I don't make money. I don't monetize my podcast. I don't have affiliate links, specifically because I don't want my voice influenced and subconsciously influenced as well. So, those of us bringing forth the truth, again, it's a fluid document. I will change my mind if the information presents itself, and I'm always open to hearing more information.
Right. And a perfect example is that I tell people not to wash their arms all the time if that's what they're exposing to sun and stuff, because there's sequential changes in molecules that you'll alter the flora, the skin flora.
Yes.
You're only going to get to the sunscreens and the anti-cancers by letting things sit. And I used to say you can't wash anything off. Well, you can't wash off the 2,5-D that's going to go into the bloodstream and go around and be that other, but there's dozens and dozens of molecules, and some of them are legitimate sunscreens.
Exactly. And so again, like you said, don't wear shades over your eyes when you're out in the sun. The lens is communicating with your skin to how much to let in and not let in. an intelligence that you could never understand. So you just let it happen, and you're setting yourself up for skin cancer if you use detergents of any kind on your skin.
Right.
That's going to wipe and wash away that sensitive lipid layer that's your protectant. That's also creates the electromagnetic field around you, so that when you think a thought, you can move your finger instantly. That's that field. Like, you have lipid layer on your electrical system in your body. You also have a lipid layer protecting and communicating with the whole field. So back to the start, stop interfering with your body.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't know some of that, but that's fascinating.
It's fascinating. The more that I do a 10-week course on kind of the ways they sneak toxins into our world and how to avoid it. One is not washing your hair. You have the sebum coating on your hair that can act like the intuition, but also you will absorb the vitamin D from the sunlight through the hair. Right. And through your forehead's a little more porous. That's why most of our foreheads should be exposed unless we get bangs. And you look at Genghis Khan had women cut their bangs because it lowered their intuition, and on we go. Oh,
that's interesting. I know about those glands you're talking about. They're one of the ones that play in the arms there. And there's some papers from the 30s on that stuff. And then the eye stuff that you're talking about, it controls melanogenesis, and so it'll summon new melanin, but it also will shuffle your melanin like umbrellas on the fly to protect your folate in there. And original sunscreen was formed vitamin D. It was D2 in eukaryotes. So that's what it was.
I didn't know that. And interestingly, when I stopped wearing sunglasses, I thought I had to wear sunglasses because I have green eyes, and I'd get headaches every time I went outside. So I started wearing sunglasses from teenage years. Well, I get sunburned every now and then. I go out with my tank top for hours hiking, and I don't get any remote redness. Yeah. Number one, I stopped using detergents on my skin and any type of lotion, because your body will create the oils if you don't use lotion. If you're hijacking it and there's a lot of chemicals in lotion too. But let's say you put the lotion on, then you stop producing that lipid layer on your skin.
Yeah, and it was a medical student that was in medical school at the time. We were at a graduation party late in the evening where people had been in the sun all day, and she pointed out who was burned and who wasn't, and how they had worn sunglasses that day and the others hadn't. That was pretty telling to me.
It's very interesting. And you will then be in the communication with the body when it's time to get out of the sun. You'll know. When you have sunscreen and sunglasses on, you don't know. You're not hearing the messages.
Right. And when you read about the melanoma scarring, I don't know what they call the melanoma scarring. The melanoma scarring is worse in the people that have the least severe melanoma cases.
Exactly. And once again, back to, we don't have to know all of this. Thank you for researching all of this for us, though, Jim. But if you don't interfere, you stop wearing the sunscreens and the sunglasses and coloring your hair and all of the other things, deodorant, then you're now in the harmony where you can hear the messages from your body of how to feed yourself, what nutrients you need, how long to stay in the sun, when you need the sun, when to go in the hot springs. Which actually sounds really good right now.
Yeah. And there's other sun molecules, like tryptophan is a molecule in your skin that's light sensitive that will then go and deal with dioxins, and it's in the tumor world. And so, get sun. Definitely get sun.
Get the
sun. Eat honey. Eat honey. I always say eat honey. It's liquid sunshine.